Okay, guys. Hey, good to be back with you. I am so excited about our guest this morning, Sonia Baumhoff. Many of you will remember Sonia from when we did an interview about a year ago or so in 1111 Live over at the CTL. And she shared some of her work with Brene Brown as we were talking about vulnerability in that service and that message that day. She's with us today because we're talking about peace in the broken. We're talking about what it means to live in the questions. And Sonia has this amazing sort of mashup of studies and background and history that involves evangelical background as well as a strong business background. And you've got advanced studies in Brene Brown's Daring Way program, and you do a lot of coaching. You're a personal coach for that and work with businesses as well as individuals. Mm-hmm. And then as I understand it, you're getting certified in Enneagram studies, which that needs to be a whole session. Mm-hmm. That needs to be a whole nother interview. Because we're not going to get into that really a lot, but it's just fascinating, and a number of our individuals are concerned about that, interested in that. But also just how your history plays into where you are now, and how this journey has played itself out in integrating, you finding integration in all of that, I think is what can really be helpful to us as we think about faith and spirituality and being broken in this time of COVID. So, officially, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this morning and being a part of this.
I'm happy to be here.
So we talked beforehand about some of the music we might do, and Brad did this Scott Chizek song, Crazy Beautiful Life. And I wanted to share these lines because it really is a great way for us to sort of kick this off. In that the last verse, there's nothing lasts forever, someone told me so. Life is always changing, it ain't what you think you know. Even if you're standing still, you're still floating in space. So grab hold of your heart, and you'll find your place in this crazy, beautiful life. Right? I mean, how does that speak to you? I mean, it resonated with what you do anyway. That's why I think you like this song so much.
Yeah, well, part of with Brene Brown's work, it's wholehearted living, right? So it leads you into that place of who are you really at the core of your being. And that opens up my journey, living a certain way for so long and not really being quite disconnected to my heart.
Oh, wow.
So learning how to connect in with that was a journey.
Would you say that a lot of us are disconnected from our heart?
I would say...
Generalizing, just a lot of us as human beings.
I think it's very easy to live on autopilot, maybe is a way to put it.
Wow, I think that's interesting. So grabbing hold of the heart has this sort of willingness to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And
really get to know who you are, right? Like, who are we apart from all the things we do? Who are we apart from our titles?
Yeah.
What the church may say we are,
Yeah.
All the things.
Right. We said that, I think when we were talking earlier, we said something, or you had said this, that there are some leaders who just haven't done their inner work. And there's a lot of there can be a lot of danger or dysfunction in that.
I think that's part of my own journey too, is learning to do my work, what that looks like for me first and foremost, and then realizing, oh my goodness, part of I think my journey that caused a lot of pain is the people that were my leaders. They were disconnected from themselves. Not intentionally. I don't think it's an intentional thing. You don't wake up one day and want to be disconnected from yourself, right? It's this, they don't know any better. They're doing the best they can. But when you are exposed to information with authority and leadership, and it doesn't bring a place of wholeness and integration, it can be quite damaging. Yeah.
So part of this process of integrating, as we've been talking about it in these interviews, is sort of looking at our journey and our narrative, where our story sort of began spiritually for us, or as we often talk about in 1111, there's really a very fine line between what it means to be human and what it means to be deeply spiritual and connected with God. To be connected deeply with God is in a real way to be connected with our deepest human self. We call it the Imago Dei. We are all born with the Imago Dei kind of thing. So tell us a little bit about your beginnings, your sort of childhood religious narrative.
So I grew up in a mainline Lutheran church. We were there all the time.
And you're from Minnesota, right?
From
Yeah, so
Minnesota.
that
Yeah, Norwegian, Lutheran, Christian. In fact, my parents used to say, repeat after me, who you're going to marry, a Norwegian, Lutheran, Christian. So it was very drilled into me. And there were good experiences with that and some not so good. There was this narrative, though, that, we're saved by grace, but yet there was this underlining, that I was just picking up that, well, right, but you have to do this, 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 and this. And I have this memory as a little girl, I'll never forget this, sitting in the back seat of my car. My dad's driving, my mom's in the front seat, and it's this little song playing. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. On my soul, take joy, my King, in what you hear. May I be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. And it was the last line. Like everything inside of me wanted to be a sweet, sweet sound in his ear. So what do I have to do that?
Mm.
And that was the message, like somehow it depended on me. At least that's how I perceived it. And it began this journey of like work.
So almost early on, there was this, for some reason, there was this incongruity. Grace, and the way John Wesley would say it is we are born in this grace. We are created in this grace. It is he calls it prevenient grace. We are already imbued with God's being and grace. And yet for you, which the Lutherans would say too, right?
Yeah.
You're saved by grace, it's already there. But something you got to do to win over God's favor.
Yeah, it was like the underlining message somehow. And, altar calls and things like that were a part of my growing up experience. And that, if you're lukewarm, you'll be spit out of his mouth. And I'll never, I went up so many times on these altar calls because you just never know for sure if you're lukewarm or not.
Yeah.
So it was like, is it enough? Am I doing enough? And that became...
So when you were growing up, you stayed in the Lutheran church. I guess you were very active, went to church most Sundays and midweek and did the whole thing.
All the things.
And then the altar calls often enough.
The altar calls. Yep.
Especially as you got older, as a young adult, I guess, too, just kind of reflecting on your life and were you matching up, were you meeting the expectations, and then going down to the altar to start over.
Yep.
Yeah, clean slate. You shared with me this picture that was hanging in your house. That floor, describe that again.
So in my
living, where it was.
Yeah, so in the den is what we called it in Minnesota, where the TV was, there was this big picture right to the right of the TV, and it was the cross, big white cross, and on one side is the world, basically, and the other side's heaven, and underneath is this big abyss, hell, and there's people walking across, little people. And I remember as a child staring at that from time to time, grateful for Jesus, for what he had done, but then wondering what happens if you slip. What happens if you slip?
Wow. I reckon that, the four spiritual laws.
Yeah.
Do you remember the four spiritual laws? You're very fluent in the four spiritual laws. I remembered them well from the days when I used to work with Child Evangelism Fellowship, Confession here. And there's some shame and guilt still that resides over those kinds of practices that, I participated in. But that was a big part of it, right? There was that big gap. You don't meet up. You just don't, you don't have it. And you never will, except for because of Jesus and his death and what that does is it sort of keeps you in this perpetual cycle, it feels like.
Yeah. Well, you start from a place of separation, not belonging. So you spend your life trying to figure out how I belong, how I can get back to that place.
Yeah.
So I don't really believe that anymore, that we're separated.
Does that kind of feed into a dysfunctional cycle?
Absolutely.
An almost addictive kind of cycle.
Yeah. Well,
we're never going to get there.
Never going to get there.
We start from being broken to begin with.
Yes. Well, even going back to that little song that I would sing, it's like, if I can start from already knowing that I am pleasing because I'm created in the image of the divine, I start there. It changes everything. I start from original blessing instead of original sin. It changes everything for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Matthew Fox was one of those first theologians who coined that phrase, original blessing. But I think it goes back to even Meister Eckhart and some of those 14th century, 13th century German
sort of like
Lutheran mystics.
Yeah.
But the mystical side that you missed out on growing up.
I did.
But this other thought too is Paul Tillich was a theologian that we often talk about in 1111, who always said the big challenge for us as people in relation to God is to accept our acceptance.
Come on.
And that seems to be like the source of so much dysfunction
So much.
in our lives.
Yeah.
So give us a little bit more about your background, because as you continued this journey, sort of in a sense towards in the Wesley tradition, we have something as ordained Methodists that when we're brought into ordination, we're set in front of the judge. We're set in front of the bishop. Oops, Freudian slip. We're set in front of the bishop. We stand in front of the bishop, all of us that are seeking ordination, and they ask a series of traditional questions. And one of them is, are you going on to a perfection? Are you going on to perfection? And it's this really strange concept of Wesleyan theology, but everybody has a different take on it. There's different spins on it, but it's at the core of who we are. And it really, I think, is rooted in this idea of accepting our acceptance and living out of that place, out of that sense of divine love, that we are then, reflections of that love in the world, and staying in that focus. And then he asks you, or she asks you, do you believe you'll be made perfect in this lifetime? Man, some of my friends, we would joke that yes, we'd be standing there with our hands behind our back and we'd just cross our fingers.
You're like, what do you mean by perfect?
Because you spend a lot of time, reflecting on these things, and I swear it's still a vague idea to put your head around. So for you, that notion was very concrete of feeling like you needed to be more.
Yeah, which is really shame-based. It's scarcity, it's lack. It's really what our culture is, if you think about it. So it's like culture, church, all the things coming together in my life, having a desire to please God just kind of pushed me. And then it showed up even in my professional life, right? Go, go, go. And then when I look at my spiritual journey, it was like, okay, so I'm Lutheran, then I go to non-denominational, then I just keep going. And then I find myself in a charismatic church, learning about being spirit-filled, all these things.
Do you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah.
About that part of your story?
Yeah.
Why you left Lutheranism for non-denominational,
Yeah.
and particularly as this program that you were in. Beyond that, what was called the School of Supernatural Ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My husband and I, we were directors, overseers of that for 5, 6, 7 years, something like that.
What was the journey through that?
It was this hunger. Really for me, it was a hunger to know God in a deep way, but it was always looking external, right? Outside of myself. I didn't really understand. I was never taught the importance of going in and connecting with who I am. To the divine, and then living out of that place. So I can look back at that now, and there were some beautiful things for sure. I learned to experience the presence of God, in the charismatic, and it was a very loving community. Super grateful for that. But with my perception, my scope, what I could see at the time, just kind of going. When we started leading the school of ministry, I was there every single day. Pretty much. And that's when, after a while, I started asking questions like, what are we doing here? Felt like we were doing the same thing over and over, like Groundhog Day. Could there perhaps be more? What's happening? Because it felt like everything was inside the four walls. And I had this desire, like we need to get out. Like, if we stay in here, we'll die in here. I actually said that one time from a microphone. And what I realized now, part of that was my own, I think, heart's cry. Like, if I stay confined in this limited scope for me on my journey, I will not find who I really am and the life flow.
And what was interesting, would it be safe for me to say, I'm going to make an assumption, an assessment here, would it be safe to say that what you were really longing for was that journey inward?
Absolutely.
To experience where that
I didn't know that
presence of divine, where that presence of God was already present, calling out essentially. But you were living outside of yourself, in a sense. You had this. What's this thing you talked about? We've had conversations about this. You talked about this triangle.
The law of three.
The law of three, because part of that, you mentioned this phrase, the need to go in and to go down.
Yeah, so the law of three has to do with, there's an affirming force, right? So we step out. For instance, okay, so I step out into the charismatic, right? And then here comes the resisting force. What's this? What's going on? Something's not making sense. What do I do with that? So now I feel uncomfortable. I have all these questions. So what we can tend to do as humans is, well, I got to fix this fast, go do something else, distract myself. And for me, it was all about busyness, right? Like I had a tendency to be a workaholic type, of course, because if I'm busy, I don't really have to think about what's going on underneath, nor can I even hear it. But the minute I slow down, here comes all the pain, potentially, and, whatever's underneath. So that being able to hold when the resistance comes, to stay in that place of discomfort, quite frankly, and learn how to do that with skillful means, kind of wrestle back and forth, can bring us to a place of greater harmony in our lives and wisdom, quite frankly.
I think of that idea, where do we find the light?
Where do we find the light?
Oftentimes in that darkest place. The light is brightest when we're willing to be in that place, which is so challenging for a lot of people even right now.
That was my journey. Like, as we moved out of that season in our life, it was probably one of the darkest seasons of my life.
Because it's unknown?
Unknown. It was a time of like, I don't know, who am I apart from the microphone, being seen, being heard, being active, all the accolades.
All the outside.
Because that's what really gave me worth, right? What I do is my worth. And that began, again, like I said, young.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of things that I could say really reinforced it throughout my life. And our culture does it anyway, for that matter, right? So all of a sudden here I am wrestling, feeling like, man, things are changing. And I had been in this capacity serving God all these years. And then suddenly I find myself wrestling. I don't even know who God is. I'm not even sure I even believe, because I was in so much pain. And didn't really know, like, what do I do with that? And then suddenly, all these other things started coming into my life. And Brene Brown was one of those things.
Yeah. We have a text that we often, one of my favorite texts in the Bible, in the New Testament, is the one where it's the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus and asks what he has to do to get to the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus says, he tells them 10 commandments. So all these outward things to be done, right? And which are grounded in inward realities, inward understanding. But there's all these outward things. So, don't have other gods. Don't covet your neighbor's possessions or your neighbor's wife. Don't take the Lord. I mean, all of these. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. These kinds of things. So there's a list of do's and don'ts.
Right.
And he says, I've done all those since childhood, which it sort of resonates with what you're saying, right? I did everything
yes,
right.
And now I'm mad because now it's not all glorious.
And then Jesus says, then you need to sell everything you have.
That's how it felt.
Right? So you literally have to take off all the masks. I think I had
the masks.
The quote here. I love this quote. I was going to share this from Meister Eckhart, who I mentioned earlier, but he has this wonderful quote. A human being has so many skins inside, covering the depths of the heart. Isn't that something?
Yes.
13th century. We know so many things, but we don't know ourselves. Why 30 to 40 skins as thick and hard as an ox skin? They cover the soul. Go into your own ground and learn to know yourself there.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, this ought to be on one of Brene's sites.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I say to my clients often, it's sort of like you're driving and the windshield is just covered with so much and you just can't really see. And we need to clean the windshield because you've been there all along.
Yeah.
You just can't see. And so how do we go through that process of cleaning the windshield is another way to say it.
So you have a great story that you tell about where this started to really crack open for you. When we were sharing, it was like, what? You couldn't have scripted that.
I know.
But you were taking your family, you and the family were going, go ahead.
We were going to Disney World. And I was right in the middle of deep pain. And I felt lost because as a doer type, I wasn't doing anything. So then what? So we go to Disney World, which I call now the fakest place on earth.
Which your daughter had a job at.
And she loves that place.
Yeah.
It's like her happy place,
who
right?
Wouldn't?
Yeah. But for me, when you are like literally bleeding, you feel like on the inside and you don't even know how to stop it because you don't have the tools necessarily. And then it was just like going to Disney World and everything, all the little parades, and I'm standing there, right, bleeding on the inside and looking at the outside of everything that feels so conjured up. It was hard.
Did you have that book with you at the time?
No, we were flying there. We were on the way, and I was listening to this minister, actually. It was a podcast. He wrote a book called So You Don't Want to Go to Church Anymore, which I devoured because I was in this place of like, I don't want to go to church anymore. What's church anyway? And so I'm listening to him, and he mentions that his wife is reading this book called The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And literally it stopped me in my tracks. I'm like, excuse me? The gifts? The gifts of imperfection. Did I hear that correctly? Because that doesn't even register in my brain. It is not a gift to be imperfect. I've been working all my life to not be imperfect. In other words, to not embrace my humanity. Because to be human is to be imperfect.
Yeah.
Ow.
Yeah.
But, and so we get there to Disney World, and my husband, little did he know, I was writing down the name of the book, writing down the author. We get to Disney World, and he's like, hey, I just happened to download something for you. And it was Dr. Brene Brown's The Gift of Imperfection. And it just began like this light bulb going off inside of me.
Yeah.
And I remember calling my therapist from Disney World and saying, because she talks a lot about shame. And all of a sudden it's like, I'm just a huge believer of going to root issues. And all of a sudden I'm like, I think I have stumbled upon what I have been dealing with all my life, but no one had put words to it. I had been swimming in shame. And if you have language for something, I feel like it's a powerful path, right, to breaking open. And so I call her and I'm like, would you agree with me that of all your clients, 99% of them, their root issue is shame? And she said, absolutely. And I'm like, and I knew it. And then it began my connecting in with her and with her work, and I just devoured it. And then I was mad. I tried to change what I was about to say, but I was angry because now I felt like I was getting all this great information from a quote secular book.
Right.
When I had been in the church all these years, sacrificing my life for the glory of God.
Right.
And now the truth is coming to me this way. And I felt like this deep invitation from God saying, yeah, come on.
Well,
like inviting me into it.
And you're speaking our language. And, my language, our language with 1111 really, which is about that journey that is sort of, is that broken open place for a lot of people, where it's just all the incongruities, the questions, and you have to sit with those long enough in order to be able to see what else is there. Some of the deepest wisdom, as you've said, comes from that willingness to sit with it, to embrace it long enough. And people have a hard time putting their head around, what, I embrace the pain?
Yeah.
It's like, it's because they want to go right and wrong. Pain bad, it's just wrong. But there is a healing possibility,
absolutely,
a transformative possibility that comes through that emptiness, that willingness to be emptied.
Well, I needed it. It actually was an invitation to get free. Freer, I should say.
I mean, what you just said reminds me of this idea of being, of this process of deconstructing, right, that we go through in this journey. And I often think of others who, that I've worked with or talked with or joined or been on this journey with me, that it's not about it's about the deconstructing, but that's not the point. That's not the end point. It's not, we're not just tearing things down.
Right.
This journey sort of becomes the process, or this process becomes the journey, I should say. But we don't lose who we are. I mean, are you at that place where you realize you've come kind of full circle in some ways?
Yeah, it's like transcend and include. Kind of reminds me of what you're talking about. There was a time where I was not there, and all the things from my past, that is bogus. I don't want anything to do with it, and all the anger, which was a necessary, I think, process as well. Learning how to not be okay and wrestle with it, but moving through, coming to a place of really deeper integration.
Yeah.
Is bringing all of it home to yourself.
I think that's so key to what we try to do in 1111 now more than anything. For the longest time, I think a lot of folks coming in from the different sort of binary kinds of relationships with faith that they've had, a lot of these evangelical and very very conservative. It's been either or.
Yeah, but that's all bad now.
So that's all bad. And so we defined ourselves, or a lot of people would define ourselves in terms of what we are not. But in reality, I think what we're really about is integration.
Integration.
How can we integrate our lives when we go through these places of brokenness?
Absolutely.
Becoming integrated is really the goal.
Yeah. So you don't live divided. It's like if you don't learn how to integrate, you live divided inside, and what's going on the inside doesn't match up with the outside, and there's this continual.
Good message for our country too.
Right?
You know, really. I mean, Linda
Timely.
and I talk about the prophets and what they speak about this idea of shalom, which is
Yes.
really God's goal, sort of, so to speak. Is it's been the divine goal of,
Yeah.
of humanity. Really, is to get to this place of integration and balance and openness and compassion, and that requires that integration. Until we get there, I guess.
Yeah, it requires a lot of things: curiosity, self-compassion, empathy. It's a journey.
So let's wrap it up. I mean,
Okay.
we could go on.
Yeah.
This has been so much fun. But one of the things I ask everybody is, how do you stay grounded in this time? And not just in this time of COVID, which is where we are with lots of layering of chaos upon chaos, but and unknowns.
Yeah.
But the journey, this spiritual journey of being broken open and finding peace in the questions, and how do you stay grounded in this process?
That's such a big question. There's a lot of different, I think, dynamics to that. But a huge piece for me is meeting myself with compassion, no matter what is coming up. Where in the past, it'd be like, oh, I can't believe I'm here again. Can't believe I'm struggling with this, and that whole message. Versus, I need to get curious. What's going on inside? And give it space and sit with it. It's sort of like the law of three we were talking about earlier. Here comes the resistance. What's in that? What's the invitation? What is it inviting me into for greater spaciousness?
And you're allowing yourself the grace to be in that place rather than fighting it
Yeah,
or
'cause what you
negating
resist-
it or shaming it.
Yeah, because what I've learned, what you resist gets stronger.
Wow. Yeah.
So when you can almost, in a sense, welcome what is without judgment, be present to it, it's quite profound.
Now, Rumi has a great quote with that: letting the stranger in, letting the unknown in. This life is a guest house.
Yes. I
Yeah,
love
it's a
that.
great poem. So can you close us out here take us out with some thoughts about this last song, because you chose this last song that Brad and that Elizabeth Wills is going to do with our band.
Yeah. Well, when you texted me and asked, it just came immediately to mind, that song, and it had a lot to do with, I think, my journey of the pain and the struggle, and now I can look back at it now, and I'm really grateful for it. It's really what ushered me into greater spaciousness in my own life, and even presence, to be here now. Versus there's a couple of lines in that song that really speak to me, especially like the dangling carrots.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like if I can just get that and do that, and the more. So it's just never enough, and that was my life story. So you're running after these elusive dangling carrots, and you're never satisfied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she says, "Thank you for
Thank
all
you
of that."
For all of it.
For all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It brought me, in essence, brought me home at a deeper level to myself and God, and I'm grateful.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been such a treat. It
Me
really
too.
has been. We're going to do this again.
Okay, good.
And we're going to talk about the Enneagram sometime
I'd
as
love
well. But for that, we're just going to let us go out with that thought. And Elizabeth, take us out with the final song. Blessings to you all until we see you again.